Hey everyone, you're watching We Had That, and today I'm going to talk about the 1983 Wave 2 German mechanic action figure from Kenner's Raiders of the Lost Ark series. Egypt, 1936. Indiana Jones has had a rough day. He and Marion were just trapped in the Well of Souls with hundreds of snakes. After managing to escape, he tries to take the airplane that's scheduled to transport the Ark when he's noticed by a mechanic wielding a huge wrench. After successfully knocking out this first mechanic, a second, bigger and stronger mechanic who witnessed the fight approaches Indy, and the biggest fight scene in the entire movie ensues. Of course, this fight scene is memorable enough that the German mechanic was made into an action figure as part of the Adventures of Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark toy line. As a side note, I'm pretty sure these figures hold the record for longest title of any toy line ever. Raiders of the Lost Ark was the highest grossing film of 1981, and kids loved it. Since Kenner's 3 3/4 inch Star Wars figures had dominated the toy industry for the last few years, Kenner ended up with the license to produce action figures in the same scale to go along with this movie as well. Unfortunately for kids, they would have to wait until the following year for the figures to make it onto the shelves at their local toy stores. That's a long time for a kid to wait. However, the movie was re-released in theaters a year after its debut in the summer of 1982, so Indiana Jones was on their minds again anyway. The first wave of 4 individually carded action figures included Indiana Jones, Tote, the Cairo Swordsman, and Marion Ravenwood. There was also a second Indiana Jones figure in a desert disguise that came with a Map Room adventure set. In addition to the 4 carded figures in the desert disguise Indy, Kenner decided to offer a figure of Belloc in his ceremonial robe as a mail-away exclusive. However, it was the regular Indiana Jones figure that all of the kids wanted. Marion was sent to stores in smaller quantities than the other 3 carded figures and became very difficult to find. Indiana Jones sold well and left plenty of Cairo Swordsman and Tote action figures hanging around in the stores. Despite the 2 peg warmers, Kenner went forward with a second wave of figures. The second wave included 4 new carded figures: Sala, a second Belloc in his regular pants and shirt, a third Indiana Jones, this time in a German uniform, and the German mechanic. There was also a Streets of Cairo adventure set that included the purple-robed monkey man with an eye patch and a non-posable Marion that you could hide in one of the baskets that came with the set. The Indiana Jones in German uniform and the German mechanic both had the quick action arm feature that the Indiana Jones from the first wave had. It's interesting to me that the Cairo Swordsman was released in the first wave, even though he was only in the movie for about 15 seconds. Yet they waited until the second wave to release the German mechanic, even though he was on screen for about 3 minutes, and his fight scene with Indy was arguably the biggest fight scene in the entire movie. I guess Kenner thought the Cairo Swordsman made a better action figure, even though his role in the movie was relatively minor. There was also a comic book adaptation of Raiders of the Lost Ark. The comic book was broken into 3 issues. The German mechanic appeared in the 3rd issue of the comic, but rather than have an extended fight scene, which probably wouldn't have worked quite as well in comic book form, the German mechanic only appeared in a total of 6 panels in the comic. Also, he wasn't killed by the propeller of the airplane as he was in the movie. He was blown up in an explosion. Because that's a more kid-friendly way to kill a villain? Although the German mechanic didn't get much of a role in the comic book, the actor who played him was certainly well respected in the movies. In the film, the German mechanic was played by wrestler and stuntman Pat Roach. In addition to his screen time in Raiders of the Lost Ark, Roach was also featured as a villain in the sequel, Temple of Doom, listed in the credits as Chief Guard. He was cast again in the 3rd movie of the series, Last Crusade, as a Gestapo agent. Although most of his scenes were cut, he does still appear briefly outside the Zeppelin that Indy and his father are trying to use to escape Germany. The German mechanic figure came with a wrench as his accessory. As a kid, I never really thought much about it, but in the movie, this character never actually had a wrench. The first mechanic in the movie fought Indy using a wrench, but the second mechanic, immortalized in action figure form, fought Indy with just his fists. I guess Kenner thought that the wrench would be a relatively cheap accessory to include, so why not? It actually was a cool accessory to have, even if it didn't really make a lot of sense for this particular action figure. It's probably no surprise that the German mechanic action figures that are available for sale today are typically missing this tiny accessory, so I'm glad that I managed to keep from losing mine for all these years. After all, what's a mechanic without a wrench? Although this line of action figures is actually quite amazing, and collectors pay big money for some of these figures today, it wasn't exactly as big of a hit at the time as lines like Star Wars and G.I. Joe. I've heard both that this line sold pretty well and that it sold badly, but the closest thing I have to proof, one way or the other, is the discounted price tags on the cards that my figures came with when I bought them as a kid. Personally, I thought they were great at the time, and it never occurred to me that they were any less popular than any other action figures on the shelves. So did you have any of the Raiders of the Lost Ark action figures as a kid? Or do you have any of them now? If so, did you just have Indiana Jones, or did you have several of the figures from this line? Tell me in the comments below. Also, please give this video a thumbs up. If you enjoy my content, subscribe to my channel and click that bell to be notified when I post new videos. And one last thing, if you're a fan of toys, you should know about ToyLanta, the biggest toy show in the southeastern United States, held annually just north of Atlanta, Georgia. Visit ToyLanta.com for more information. As always, thanks for watching.